Tonight, we begin with a revelation so serious that Western intelligence agencies initially debated whether it should ever be acknowledged publicly at all. A cyber operation that crosses a line most nuclear powers believed could never be crossed. Not theoretically, not hypothetically, in reality. Ukraine didn't probe Russian systems, they didn't test defenses, they didn't skim the surface. According to multiple intelligence assessments, Ukrainian cyber forces penetrated the core command infrastructure tied to Russia's nuclear forces, the digital backbone Moscow has spent decades insisting was untouchable. And when Vladimir Putin learned what had happened, the reaction wasn't defiance. It wasn't denial. It wasn't the cold, rehearsed composure the world has come to expect. For a brief moment, caught on camera inside the Kremlin, Putin looked shaken. If you want clear, unfiltered analysis of moments like this, subscribe now. Because what just happened could reshape global security. Western intelligence analysts who reviewed the footage didn't focus on what Putin said. They focused on what he couldn't hide: a tightening jaw, a frozen stare, a visible pause where confidence should have been automatic. That moment alone told them something had gone catastrophically wrong. Tonight, we're breaking down what Ukraine accessed, why this breach stunned intelligence agencies worldwide, and why Putin's reaction may be the most revealing signal we've seen since the war began. Picture the scene: a secure Kremlin briefing room, swept constantly for surveillance. Designed to project control, Vladimir Putin sits at the head of the table receiving what should have been a routine update. Around him are the men tasked with guarding Russia's deepest secret, the heads of intelligence, internal security, and military command. These are the officials who promised him Russia's nuclear systems were isolated, air-gapped, protected by legacy architecture. No modern cyber force could touch. Then the briefing changes. Not a warning, not a suspicion, a confirmation. Ukrainian cyber units had gained internal access, not to peripheral networks, not to administrative systems, to command linked infrastructure tied to nuclear readiness, and Putin reacts before he can stop himself. That reaction matters, because leaders trained to project strength do not break composure unless something foundational has been threatened. If you're still watching, subscribe. This story only gets more serious from here. For months, there had been quiet signals inside cyber, intelligence circles, not press leaks, not official statements, patterns. Ukrainian cyber activity had become unusually disciplined, methodical, then silence. And in cyber warfare, silence is never inactivity. It's preparation. Analysts recognize the indicators immediately. Reconnaissance phases completed, vulnerabilities mapped. Persistence established, then nothing, no noise, no probes, no disruption. That's the calm before execution. And this week, execution arrived. According to intelligence briefings shared among NATO partners, Ukraine conducted a coordinated cyber penetration using advanced exploits and access pathways designed not to cause damage, but to prove access, to show Moscow what could be seen, what could be reached. That distinction matters. This wasn't sabotage, it was a message. Ukraine wanted Russia to know the door was open. Ukrainian intelligence officials later confirmed, in carefully chosen language, that they had achieved meaningful visibility into Russian strategic systems. Not to trigger escalation, but to demonstrate capability. When Moscow denied everything, Ukraine released technical details that could only come from inside the system. That denial collapsed instantly. NATO cyber units independently verified anomalous activity consistent with internal access. Emergency briefings followed, not just in Washington, but across Europe and within nuclear security commands worldwide. If you value this kind of deep breakdown, hit subscribe. Now, these aren't headlines, they're warning signs. One senior Western defense official described the breach as a moment that changes how nuclear security is understood. Because for the first time, a non-nuclear state demonstrated access to the command infrastructure of a nuclear power, and Putin knows what that means. Russia's nuclear posture has always relied on one belief above all else: absolute system security, the assumption that command and control could never be compromised. That deterrence was unquestionable. That assumption is now gone. And the most telling proof wasn't a document or a leak. It was Putin's face. Because in that moment, the world saw something rare: fear breaking through discipline, the realization that what was once considered invincible might not be. And that realization is far more destabilizing than any missile. We're only halfway through this story: what happened next inside Russia, how Moscow reacted behind closed doors, and why this may have triggered the most frantic security response we've seen in years. That's where this becomes truly dangerous. Stay with us. And here's where this stops being a shocking cyber story and becomes a global security crisis. Because Moscow's response after that briefing told Western intelligence agencies something far more important than any technical detail ever could. Russia didn't calmly investigate. They didn't quietly patch systems. They didn't project confidence. They panicked. If you want to stay ahead of how this escalates, subscribe right now. This phase of the war is moving faster than the headlines. Within hours of the internal alert, Russian nuclear-linked communication channels reportedly went dark. Not partially, completely. Backup systems were isolated. Emergency protocol reviews were triggered across multiple strategic facilities. Security personnel were recalled from leave. Entire teams were pulled into overnight audits. That doesn't happen unless leadership believes something fundamental has been compromised. And it wasn't just technical chaos. It was informational lockdown. Russian state media received explicit instructions to avoid the story entirely. No denial segments. No counter-narratives. Silence. Silence is never strength. Western intelligence intercepted internal Kremlin communications describing the breach as unacceptable, systemic, and deeply destabilizing. Those are not words used for routine cyber incidents. Those are words reserved for existential threats. If this analysis matters to you, like and subscribe, because this isn't speculation. It's how power reacts when it's exposed. Here's what makes this operation uniquely dangerous. Ukraine didn't destroy systems. They didn't alter data. They didn't disrupt command chains. They demonstrated access and then stepped back. That's psychological warfare at its highest level by proving visibility without pulling the trigger. Ukraine forced Russia to imagine every worst-case scenario on its own. What could be altered? What could be delayed? What could be spoofed? What could be seen in real time? In deterrence theory, uncertainty is poison. Nuclear credibility depends on absolute confidence, not just in weapons, but in command integrity. Once doubt enters that equation, everything changes. Every threat carries hesitation. Every escalation carries risk. And Putin knows this better than anyone if you're still watching. Subscribe again, because what happens next affects far more than Ukraine. For decades, Russia's nuclear posture relied on one core myth, that its command systems were untouchable, built on legacy architecture, physically isolated, immune to modern cyber warfare. That myth just collapsed. And history tells us exactly what happens when impossible access is proven possible. In the 1980s, when the Soviet Union learned that Western intelligence had penetrated what it believed were secure communications channels, the reaction wasn't public rage. It was internal restructuring. Paranoia. Purges, rewrites of doctrine. The same thing happened when Iran discovered its nuclear systems were compromised from the inside. The psychological damage outweighed the physical impact. Russia is now facing that same realization, but with nuclear weapons. Western analysts believe this is why Putin's reaction mattered so much. Not because he was embarrassed, because he understood immediately what this meant for deterrence, for bargaining power, for internal confidence. That brief crack in composure wasn't weakness, it was recognition. If this breakdown is changing how you see this war, subscribe now. The next phase is more dangerous than anything we've seen so far. And this is where the risks multiply. A Russia that believes its nuclear command integrity is compromised may react in unpredictable ways. Overcorrecting security, accelerating countermeasures, tightening control, or attempting to reassert credibility through aggressive signaling. At the same time, Ukraine has sent an unmistakable message. The fortress isn't sealed. The walls have cracks, and access is possible. That combination, exposed vulnerability and wounded pride, is volatile. Western governments now face a delicate balancing act. They must support Ukraine's demonstrated capability while preventing panic-driven escalation from a nuclear power suddenly unsure of its own systems. This isn't just about cyber warfare anymore. It's about how power behaves when its last line of confidence is shaken. If you want continued coverage like this, hit like and subscribe. These moments don't announce themselves twice. So bring it back to the moment that started all of this: a secure room, a routine briefing, and a realization no Russian leader ever expected to confront, that what was supposed to be invulnerable wasn't that what was meant to deter. Now invites doubt that the image of absolute control may have been a carefully maintained illusion. And illusions, once broken, don't come back tonight. One truth stands above everything else. Ukraine didn't just execute a cyber operation. They shattered an assumption that underpinned Russian power for generations. And Putin's reaction confirmed just how deep that shock went. What happens next will define the most dangerous chapter of this conflict. Because when nuclear confidence erodes, history stops moving slowly. And this story is far from over.